Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. I think we will have a few folks join as we proceed tonight, but we've got a lot of great material to cover, and I think we'll jump in and get started. My name is Dan Macon. I am the Livestock and Natural Resources Advisor with UC Cooperative Extension, covering Placer, Nevada, Sutter, and Yuba counties. And I really appreciate everybody joining tonight. It's always a little different doing this virtually because I think we do have some folks from outside the foothill counties as well, which is outstanding. I do want to thank the Tahoe Cattlemen's Association for co-sponsoring tonight's webinar. We've got a number of board members that are on the webinar tonight. Want to call out Judd Tripp, who is eating Haagen-Dazs ice cream in front of us, and he'll hear about it at the next board meeting, I'm sure. We've also got Jeff Carroll, who's a board member, on with us tonight. Jackie Davis has joined us. Don Campos and Greg Lawley are on. So really appreciate the Tahoe Cattlemen's Association stepping up and helping with this tonight. Also want to just let you know about upcoming webinars. I think many of you have signed up for these, but October 20th, we'll have a webinar, same time, same place, on beef business basics. On October 22nd, we'll have a session on grazing management. October 27th is a little different webinar, but there may be some interest here, where we'll be talking about the business of targeted grazing for fuel load reduction and weed control. On October 28th, we have an informational meeting for foothill ranchers about the possibility of forming a Ranchers Fire Safe Council here in the Sierra Foothills. And we'll have some informational speakers and then a discussion about what that might entail. And on October 29th, we'll have a beef cattle nutrition webinar, 6 o'clock in the evening as well. So if you need more information, I think you all have my email address, but here it is again, and then my website is down there at the bottom. And so with that, I am really pleased to have two really outstanding speakers tonight to talk about cattle health. Our first speaker this evening will be Dr. Gabby Meyer, who is Assistant Specialist in Cooperative Extension for Beef Cattle Herd Health and Production. She's been there at Davis since 2018. And her research is really focused on finding solutions to health challenges in California beef production, with an emphasis on cow-calf production. She's also been doing a variety of workshops and seminars for ranchers, for hobby farmers, and for the public. She graduated from Davis in 2009 with her DVM, and followed that with a residency in livestock production and herd health. She's board certified in preventive veterinary medicine and has a PhD in epidemiology as well from UC Davis, and she focused her research on bovine respiratory disease in dairy calves. We're really happy to have her here tonight, and I will turn it over to Dr. Meyer as our first speaker. So Gabby, thank you for joining us.
All right, so I will be sharing my screen.
And real quick, I did forget to mention, if you could mute your video while our speakers are talking, that will preserve our bandwidth. And if you do have questions, go ahead and put them into the chat box, and I will moderate questions as we go through. So Gabby, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, okay. So so thanks for having me. I was asked, or Dan asked me to talk about parasites, and it's a really big topic, so we have to go fast to get through it. It's the agenda, so it's pretty straightforward. We're going to talk about external parasites and internal parasites, and we're going to talk about how to control them. And for the internal parasites, I'm going to mostly focus on how you're going to avoid to build resistance to the dewormers, and then there will be some Q&A. So let's get started with the external parasites. And actually, before we get into this, we do have a few polls where Dan is going to bring up some questions, and then it's just to kind of break it up a little bit. So let's start with that so you can answer these questions. So the first one, external parasites are affecting my production. So do you disagree or, somewhat agree, etc., etc.? Pick one.
This is to get everybody in practice for voting next month. So
That's right.
everybody see that okay?
In-person voting.
Yes, that's right.
No mail-ins allowed.
Can you all see that on your screen? Are you able to vote?
Okay, that should have been enough time. Do we have any results or?
We're starting to come in. We've got 4 votes, 5 votes.
Okay.
All right, we'll give you just a few more seconds here.
Well, it looks like it's external parasites seem to be, yeah, maybe kind of a problem. Not, it doesn't seem like it's an overwhelming problem, but it's also not that it's no problem. All right, okay. So let's talk about, so can we see, I'm going to close that and I don't know, I don't know.
I've
Oh, there
closed,
we go.
there we go. I think it
Good.
takes a
All
few
right.
seconds.
Okay. So I wanted to start with showing you this resource here. And it is a web page. It was put together by one of our colleagues at the at UC Riverside by Dr. Alec Gary. He's a veterinary entomologist, so he's a bug guy essentially. And I will put this. I mean, I can put this in the chat box right now. Let's see if I can. How do I do this? Well, I think I will do that later. There we go. So yes, I will give you all these resources that I'm showing you. So what this page does, or what you can do with it, is so on one hand, you can look up pests of different animal species. So, if you're interested in if you want to know about face flies, you can look this up and, you can read about them and you have links to more pages. So that's wonderful. But what is really nice and what I really wanted to show you is this. So find pesticide. And what this will let you do is it will give you all the pesticides for specific pests in your state. So each state has its own regulations. So if we go to California, and then we can look up cattle, but you can also look up horses, goats, whatever. And you pick a pest. So let's say we want to know about ticks. We want to find out, well, what are all the things that we can use that are effective against ticks? And let's say, well, I want to know about ear tags. And let's just say all ear tags, and then you click search, and then it will bring you up this list of 10 different ear tags. So it's the product name, it's the AI's active ingredient, this code that will come back to later, who's making it, and the EPA registration code. So you can sort these by clicking on this, and then it will sort them by this code, so this IREC code. So what this means is that all the ones that have the same code, they're in the same chemical class. And so, when you look at these ingredients, that does not necessarily tell you that, this one and this, Coumaphos is the same as diazinon. I mean, who would know that? So what's important about that is that you want to switch out these classes. You don't want to always use the same class. You want to, when you switch, for example, if you use 2 tags in one year, or if you use one tag 1 year and then in the next year you want to use another tag, you want to switch the classes, and that is so that the bugs don't get used to them and develop resistance. So, and the ones that don't have a code, they are a combination of classes. All right, so let's go back to our presentation. So that's that. So now we're going to talk about 4 different bugs. So I picked, I started with ticks. So why ticks? Well, on the one hand, they can transmit diseases to cattle. So in California, we're especially lucky, in quotation marks, that we have a tick that's found nowhere else. It's the pajahuelio tick. I'm sure you know about it. It is the one that can transmit foothill abortion. And then we also have ticks that can transmit Anaplasma marginale, which is, of course, the causative agent of anosmosis. So those are kind of complicated diseases. We'll hear about the foothill abortion vaccine from Dr. Becky later on. But suffice it to say that, you know, even though tick control is good, you're not going to manage these diseases with tick control alone. But ticks still are a problem because they suck blood. Well, so we want to feed cattle. We don't want to feed ticks. So they can be production limiting, and they can also transmit diseases to us, right? They can transmit Lyme disease, Rocky Mountain spotted fever, and they just kind of give us the heebie-jeebies. So what do we do? How do we control them? Well, so ear tags, so this is according to Dr. Gary. So he recommends placing ear tags starting in March, and then following that up with a mid-season spray or pour-on. And then important, remove the tags at the end of the season, or even, well, better, read the label. I know everybody likes reading instructions, so read the label and find out how long this tag is active, and then take it out when it's not active anymore. Why? Well, because once that period is up, it's not going to be as effective anymore in killing the bugs. And if the ticks are exposed to dosages that are not going to kill them, they have a chance to get used to them. So that's why it's important to do that. And then when you follow up with a different tag, as I mentioned before, switch it to a different code, to a different IREC code. Horn flies. So that's our next bug. Horn flies. So those are those little flies that are on the backs of cattle, and there are a lot of them. So often we can see up to 1,000 or more on an animal. It's like a little cloud that hovers over them, and they will pierce the skin. They feed on blood, and they can lead to economic losses because they're so bothersome. They can eat up to 30 times a day. So kind of a threshold to treat is if you see 100 to 200 flies on an animal. And so, you know, for example, if you look at this one, you don't have to count. You already know that's more than 100 or 200 even. But if you start seeing them and you want to count them, you know, make sure that when you're on one side of the cow, you double that, because there's going to be just as many on the other side. Also make sure that you do that more in the morning, because when it gets hot, they will move towards the belly. And so these guys, the only good thing about these guys is that they offer us 2 targets. So they stay on the cattle. They don't move away. They spend their entire life on cattle, except for when they lay eggs, and they lay eggs in cow manure. So that's the second target. They only do that in cow manure. So that gives us opportunity for fly control. So there's many, many different options. When you go to that page and you look that up, you see, you know, a gazillion different ways to treat them. Dust bags work okay, so those work great when cattle have to go somewhere where they are. So if you have a gate where they have to pass through to get to water or to feed, that's a great place. there's many different options. And then the other target is the manure. So we have insect growth regulator, IGR, and you can get those in mineral mixes, in blocks, etc. So that's something that just passes through the cattle. It does nothing inside the cattle. It's just meant to go right straight through them and into the manure. And there it will affect the developing larvae in the manure and kill those. So ear tags are also very popular to use those. And we are starting to see some resistance to ear tags. And so you want to avoid that by, again, following the label. Don't be stingy. Don't put in just one tag, put in 2 tags, and then rotate the chemicals. If you do see failure, if you do think that they're not working as they should, rotate to a different chemical class, maybe a different type of application as well. Stable flies. They are pretty mean. They have this long mouth part that you can see here in this picture that can pierce. It's a piercing mouth part that penetrates the skin. So these guys suck blood as well. And it only takes very few to really irritate cattle. So they make them very nervous. They kind of, they start stomping, they bunch up because it's very painful. So these can also lead to economic losses because cows are so worried, they don't eat because they want to get away from these flies. So they are mostly on the legs, but they don't stay on cattle. They will spend quite a bit of time away from cattle. And the threshold for when you want to start treating is 5 flies per front leg. So what do you do to control stable flies? Well, because they don't offer us the same targets as the horn flies, meaning they don't stay on the cattle and they're on the legs, so the ear tags really won't work. You can do sprays, but the best is really to don't give them a chance to breed. So where do they breed? It's organic decaying material. So hay that's gotten wet or you've soaked with urine, that's a perfect breeding ground for them. So, cleanliness is next to godliness in this case for sure. So cleaning up those kinds of messes will help. Also, these kinds of traps have been recommended. They have to be put where cattle congregate and where maybe those areas are where it's kind of muddy, where they are likely to breed. And then there's another option, parasitic wasps, which is kind of cool, which are wasps that will parasitize the larvae of these flies and kill them. And these wasps, they don't sting us, so they're perfectly safe. But they only work in a very enclosed area or very small area. So if you have cattle out on range, this will not work. This will only work if you have cattle that are only, in a pasture right by your house or by a barn, where it's a small area. And this is typically this is a subscription where they have to be replaced at regular intervals.
Gabby, we have a question in the chat box on IGRs. Is there a withdrawal time on the insect growth regulators?
Not that I know, because they are inert.
Okay.
I don't think there is.
Okay. Thank you.
Face flies. Face flies, as the name implies, they like the face. And they feed off of tears and nasal secretions. So these guys, they do spend some time away. They're not always on the cattle, but they do only lay their eggs in cow manure. They do not suck blood, but what their importance is that they can transmit Moraxella bovis, which is the causative agent for pink eye. And here is an image of their mouth parts. So it's an electron micrograph, so it's blown up very, very, it's enlarged a gazillion times. But on the right side, you see these are their teeth. So you can imagine they look pretty sharp, and so they can do some damage on the eyeball, and so that can predispose them to pink eye. So what do we do to control them? Again, it's a little bit difficult to control the adults because they don't spend all the time on the cows, but ear-tics, they do provide some relief, and they have been shown to reduce pink eye when used. The other option is to put some insecticide, so some fly spray that you can find on that page, and kind of rub that on or put that on a cloth and rub it on the cattle's faces when you process them. But the best is to use the IGR in this case. All right, so now we're shifting gears and going to internal parasites. And before we do that, let's launch our second poll.
And I think they launched all together, Gabby. So let's see what our second answer was. Yeah.
Oh, we already have the answers?
Yeah, yeah. So people are a little less confident, looks like, about management of internal parasites.
Okay. All right. Well, let's just continue. So internal parasites. So what are we talking about? So we have well, worms, and so GI worms, and there is a whole list of different ones. The most important ones are these two, Cooperative and Assocaition. But it doesn't really matter. They all have the same type of life cycle. So what happens? Cows shed eggs. They have the worms inside them. They live inside their intestines. They shed the eggs. They develop into larvae. The larvae crawl onto grass and get eaten. So it's just a cycle. Lungworms, they're very similar, but the adults live in the lungs. They can cause respiratory signs, so they can have like a dry cough, and they will cough up the larvae and then swallow them, and then the larvae get shed in the feces. So in order to, if you test for them, if you're not sure if you have them, you need a different type of test, but your veterinarian will figure that out for you. Other than that, it's the same type of life cycle. And then finally, we have flukes, and flukes live where it's wet. So they need some moisture. So it's either irrigated pasture, or if there's a creek or some moisture. Where it's completely dry, they cannot survive. And they also, not only do they need moisture, they also need a snail in order to complete the life cycle. So the eggs, when the eggs get shed, they will hatch, and then they have to find this little snail that lives in the mud. And it will complete the life cycle there, or some of the larval stages there, will leave the snail, and then needs to be eaten by a cow in order to then become a liver fluke. So because of that, the timing for treatment is important. So if you treat it during other times of the year, so you want to treat in the fall. That's when that life cycle has been completed, because the snail will bury itself in the winter time, and this will not happen in the winter time. So it's recommended to treat for flukes in late summer, early fall, when that so it needs that time to complete that life cycle. So how do we treat for intestinal parasites? Well, there's 3 classes, just like with the IRAC code, we have 3 kind of classes for wormers. And so why is this important? Again, it's going to be important for prevention of resistance. So I can tell you there is nothing in the pipeline. There are no new wormers on the horizon. We have some new wormers in other countries, but there's no sign that they will become available in the US, unfortunately. The other thing is the goal of a deworming program should not be to get rid of all worms. It's kind of, you just want to control them. So these are the three classes. So we have, these are the oldest ones. They were developed, the first ones were developed in the 1960s. So they've been around for a while. So these are your white wormers that you give by mouth. So we have, they all end in azole. Bendazole, that's Safeguard. Albendazole, that's Valbazen. Oxbendazole, that's Synanthic. What do I want to say about them? Well, Valbazen, I think that's an important one. It works on flukes, and it should not be given in early pregnancy. So in the first 45 days of pregnancy, it can cause abortion. So that's important to know about that one. Then we have this second class, which is a little bit obscure. I don't think a lot of people use it. It's called nicotinic agonists. So we have levamisole is the active ingredient. There's two versions of it, Prohibit and Levamed. And then we have Rumetel, which is Morento. It's basically a medicated feed. Little bit difficult to make sure that every animal gets the right amount. So these are not as popular. And then, of course, we have...
Gabby,
Yes.
Two questions for you real quick.
All right.
One on the levamisole or the Prohibit. I know that when we have used that in sheep, that the dosage amount is really critical, that it can be overdosed and cause problems. Is that less of a problem with cattle?
I am not 100% sure, but I think it is more critical to dose this one correctly than others. Others, like the azoles, are much more forgiving. So yes, it's true. This one, you have to be more careful.
Okay. All right. Second question real quick, just to go back to the external parasites. Will the oil rubbers help with face flies?
Good question. I guess if they rub it on their face, they will.
Okay.
I mean, yes, if they, if they do, if they have to go by, if they have to make contact with their head, but I don't know if they, I guess it just depends on where they're positioned.
Okay.
So I guess it's worth a trial and error, try it out. If it works, great. If you still see tons of flies on them, well, then you have to come up with a different solution.
Okay. Sorry to interrupt. Thank you.
No, it's okay. All right. So here the macrocyclic lactones. So these are the newest ones, but there's also now already 40 years old. So they're all end in ectin. So ivermectin, epidomectin, doramectin, and moxidectin. So why did I tell you all this? So here's the deal. I'm going to tell you this about this study, and this is nobody wants to hear about research diagrams and such, but this one I think it's quite eye-opening. So this was a NAM study, so that's the National Animal Health Monitoring Study. They do one every year in a different livestock species. Yeah, it's a nationwide survey, and they're quite good and they're quite interesting. So in this one was a cow-calf study, and they looked at dewormers. So they collected fecal samples and they targeted weaned calves. So why weaned calves? Well, that's our most vulnerable population. They have not developed immunity yet to worms, to intestinal parasites, and they don't have the maternal antibodies anymore from the colostrum. So they're they're just weaned, so they're stressed. So they're the most vulnerable population in terms of worms. So they had to have been grazing for a while and not dewormed, blah, blah, blah. So what they did was they took a fecal sample, and they looked for fecal eggs. So that's what the fecal eggs look like under the microscope at the time that they were dewormed. And this is just an example. So the ranchers could use whatever they wanted. So they would deworm, then took a sample and looked for eggs. And then they came back 2 weeks later and they looked for eggs again. And what you want to see is you want to see a reduction of 90%. So if you see 100 eggs the first time, you don't want to see more than 10 eggs the second time. And if you see more, then that's an indication that there's resistance. So what was the result? Well, they found 44% of the herds that they sampled actually had signs of resistance. So that was 12 years ago. And what were they using? Well, most of them used boron because that's what everybody uses, right? And there was actually a difference between the generic and the brand name. And I don't know what it is, but apparently, I mean, I've heard this from multiple people and from other studies. This just seems to be something that where the generic, that just doesn't seem to be as good. So 75% of those that used the generic boron had signs of resistance in this study. Well, okay, so what is it with the borons? Well, we like to use them. They don't stress the cattle so much, but the problem is often with underdosing. So we just dial it onto whatever we think is kind of the average, and then that's what everybody gets. It can be licked off by other cattle. It is the one that's the most likely to be incorrectly dosed because of that reason. So I'm going to show you a clip on how to use those, on how to apply wormer. It's by Kansas State. This is a great video. I'll give you the link to that as well. And here we have Dr. Tarpov showing us how to apply wormer the best way.
Next, I would like to briefly go over topical application of animal health products. Topical applications would be either dewormers or fly control products, fly or lice control products that we administer in the field. A few tips that I like to really point out for producers is proper application, that we get full coverage of these topical products over these animals each time we administer. Now, that can be easier said than done, especially with some of our newer products that are very concentrated and low dose. What I really like to do with those concentrated products is I turn my dosing gun to half the volume of what this animal actually needs. So I will administer the squeeze of the gun twice. And the reason that I do that is the label actually calls that we get product from the back of the pole all the way to the tailgate. In order to have that type of coverage from some of these low dose products, if I split the dosage in half, I can have the opportunity to go from the neck all the way down to about the withers. And then I refill the syringe and I go the rest of the way down to the tailgate. That way we truly do get full coverage on that animal to maximize the efficacy of the product we use. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about proper implant.
All right, well, that's fine, but we are done with Dr. Oops, I'm sorry. Go to the right slide. There we go. Okay, so what are some ways that lead to resistance? So treating too often. So what is too often? Well, it's kind of a relative term. You know, it's hard to say, but it kind of depends on the situation. But I would say that if you have to treat more than twice a year for intestinal parasites, then either your wormer isn't working or you need to change something with your pasture management. So that should definitely do it. Treating every animal, and that's something it's hard not to do because we have a tendency to just want to, well, we want to treat everybody so that everybody has the advantage of getting the dewormer. However, really our best looking cows that are already a few years old, so if they're 3 years or older, they probably don't need it. And it will really help to slow down resistance. So this is also something that's kind of old hat. So treating everybody and then moving them to a clean pasture that's been sitting for a while. And we think, okay, we're just going to start with a blank slate. No, that's not good. We don't want to do that anymore. Why? I will I will explain that with a diagram later, but it basically means that all that's going to happen is that only the resistant parasites will end up on that clean pasture, and we want to avoid that. And then underdosing. So how do you dose it correctly? Well, so most of these, porons, they're pretty safe in terms of the dosing. So if you set it to what you think is your heaviest animal in that group, of course, like cows, stockers, calves, you want to set it for each group separately, but set it to what you think is the heaviest animal. And because you're not treating everybody, you will save some, and you can use that to treat it, to make sure that everybody gets a dose that works. So do not underdose. That if you remember one thing from this talk, it's this: do not underdose. All right. And then how do you slow resistance? So you want to choose the right drug, combinations of drugs. That's really the latest. That's what all the veterinary parasitologists recommend nowadays, is to use 2 drugs. So to use an oral wormer in combination with one of those porons. Why? Because you're basically getting at the worms from 2 angles. So it's unlikely that they're resistant to 2 drugs. So you're definitely going to get, you're definitely going to kill them with that. And so you use them at the same time, and your withdrawal time will be for the longest, the longer of the 2. But it doesn't, you don't have to add them or anything. It's just whatever is the longest withdrawal. Good pasture management, so that means not overgrazing. So most of those larvae that we showed you on those life cycles, they're in the bottom 4 inches of the pasture. And then rest periods are good. So especially in California, we have a lot of sun. So sun kills parasite eggs or larvae and can lead to lower burden. And then refugia, and I will tell you what that means. So that means you don't treat everybody, because 70 to 80% of all the worms are in 20% of the animals. So the way to remember that is, when I look at my Facebook feed, I would say that 70 to 80% of all the posts are from, at the most, 20% of my friends. You always have the friends that post every day. They always have something, right? And so it's the same with intestinal parasites. And then if you think, well, I don't really have a problem with resistance, then, well, that's probably because you just haven't seen it yet. It's in cattle, it's not as obvious. Dan will probably tell you that in small ruminants, he's nodding, it's much more dire. It's really becoming a problem, and we don't want this to become a problem in cattle as well. So here, we're almost done. I just wanted to give you a visual of what refugia, this concept of refugia, how it works. So just imagine that these yellow dots are resistant parasites, and the blue ones are susceptible. So the blue ones get killed, the yellow ones don't. Okay, so let's say you treat everybody. So what does that lead to? Well, it leads to only the resistant ones surviving. And then if you keep doing that and keep doing that over time, what happens is you end up with this. You end up with a population that is resistant. So on the other hand, if you start and leave some untreated, then that means you have some survivors. You have some that would have died, some worms that would have died from the dewormer, but they survived because you left them untreated. And so when you keep doing that, you will essentially keep the same sort of population. So you will not end up with a population of worms that doesn't respond. This is the big caveat. We don't really have studies that show that this works in cattle, just because it's difficult to do, and it just hasn't reached the level of urgency yet that we need to do it. But it works it has been shown over and over. It works in small ruminants, and all the experts say this needs to happen now. So these are my general recommendations. Again, so for the external parasites, so look up what you want to treat on that page, choose the right time to treat, follow label instructions, don't leave those tags in forever, switch those classes around every year. And then for the dewormers, don't underdose, don't treat every animal. Use multiple classes for maximum efficacy, for extra points. If you want to do a really good job, then use 2. And then do not overgraze, and you will have very few problems with worms. So that's all I have. Do we have any more questions? Dan, you're muted.
You'd think after 7 months of Zoom, I'd figure that out.
Happens all the time.
So we do have another question. How do I know if my cattle have an internal parasite problem? What kinds of things should I be looking for?
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of just outwardly, if it's a big problem, you know, you can see diarrhea, especially in the young stock. Coccidia is also a big problem in young stock, and we haven't touched on coccidia, but that is also an intestinal parasite that is often a problem in stalker calves. If it becomes worse, they will lose kind of their luster, their hair coat gets dull, they can become gaunt looking, bottle jaw if it gets really bad. So those are kind of extremes. What you can do is submit a sample to a lab, ideally through your vet. So talk to your vet about it. They can sample a few animals. Often you can combine samples so that you don't have to submit 10 different samples and pay for those. You can combine those just to get sort of an idea. And then what's really great to do is if you do that fecal egg count reduction test, what I talked about earlier, where you take a sample, treat, and then wait 2 weeks, and then you can just grab patties off the fresh patties off the pasture, and then test again. And then if you see that that it's a lot less, and they will tell you, well, you can have the eggs counted at the lab, and they can tell you then, how much fewer eggs you have. So that's a great way to see if what you're doing is working.
Great. Any other questions for Dr. Meyer? She's going to be with us, I think, till the bitter end tonight. So if other questions occur to you, please put them in the chat box.
Yes, and I will put the links to all those resources in the chat box.
And I will also add that we are recording this tonight, and I will post a video of the webinar on my Ranching in the Sierra Foothills YouTube page. So if there's something you missed or something you want to go back over, you'll have a chance to look at it there. Gabby, thank you. That was outstanding. Really, I learn a lot every time I hear you talk. So thank you very much. All right, so we're going to transition now to Dr. Becky Childers, and I do want to introduce Dr. Childers as well. Many of you, I think, that are from here locally know Dr. Childers, but she grew up on a small ranch here in Placer County, involved in showing cattle and horses. She also is a graduate of UC Davis School of Veterinary Medicine, graduated in 2004, and came back here to Placer County and started a solo ambulatory large animal practice. She's got a mix of horses and livestock production and hobby farmer clients. And I know that in talking with my own wife, that makes for a very interesting day most days. So we do appreciate her being here. She's now working part-time and is also a mom to 2 boys, and sometimes even gets to ride her horse Badger. So Becky, I think we've lost your video there.
Yeah, it decided to quit right before my turn. So
Do you want to try to log back on?
But
or
you
do you
can
want to
hear
just,
me?
We can hear you. We can hear you.
Okay, I'm fine without you seeing me. That's fine.
All right. All right. So we're going to do this section kind of as a little Q&A. And I want to start by asking you, Becky, what is this term that I've heard, vet-client-patient relationship? What does that mean? And why should a rancher be concerned with that?
Yeah, so that's definitely become more of an issue in the last few years since especially California took all the over-the-counter medications off, and so it's important to have a vet involved. So you've heard the term VCPR, and like you said, it's kind of a formal relationship between a veterinarian and the producer. It's choosing a vet that you're going to be comfortable working with. You're going to get to know them. They're also going to get to know your situation, your livestock, your management practices, and hopefully our goal is to be just kind of a partner in your practice and help you with questions you might have or make your herd the most efficient possible. Along with that, we get record keeping. We're also agreeing to help you with follow-up and either provide emergency services or help you find others if we're unavailable, and also can prescribe medications for certain disease issues for you when we have that in place.
And does that involve a kind of an annual visit? And even if there's not a problem going on, do you need to see the patients and the client on an annual basis?
Yes. So as a minimum, and I do have some clients that I only see them once a year. And, some of them, they don't use me for preg check or for brucellosis or anything, which often we tie in for our yearly visit. But we'll literally go and get in the side-by-side and just ride out through the cattle and talk about a basic discussion of nutrition, your management practices, what your vaccine program is, your parasite control, and all the kind of health issues that your herd seems to have an issue with. And then what we do is put in place some protocols dealing with those specific things, like foot rot and pink eye are probably big things that most people deal with. So we'll put, and actually I do written protocols for a lot of your basic diseases, where talk about which drugs are actually approved for those things, following label instructions, making sure you have your withdrawal times down, and all those sorts of things.
And are the withdrawal issues becoming more and more serious? Is that something even at the cow-calf level we need to be aware of?
It is, and I think it's important for the producer to be really in charge of what they're doing. From my understanding, sometimes these cattle go to a sale, they may have a medical hold on them and a tag, but once they leave the grounds, who knows what happens to them. So I think being responsible producers, making sure we're using appropriate drugs for the diseases by the appropriate route, because all of that can change your withdrawal times. It's not if you start giving a drug like Banamine, it's labeled for IV use. If you give it IM, you're not going to have your 4-day meat withdrawal. It's going to be longer. So some of those things that the vet can also help you make sure that you have on target.
I believe that Mr. Tripp had a question. He's raising his hand. He's not using the chat box. Go ahead, Jed.
The withdrawal is more important than you can imagine. And the reason I say that is if you take an animal to the sale and it looks a little bit off, there are several people who buy them and send them to a slaughterhouse. And all of those animals are tested for withdrawals. And if they show signs of medication, they will come back to the rancher and they will lock you up with your whole medication program. So it's very important that the withdrawal periods are adhered to. Now then, if you sell them at the sale and you're not sure about the withdrawal period, you can indicate so, and then you're clear. So the withdrawal is more important than you can imagine. Now then, at the feedlot where I feed cattle, every animal is tagged with a lot number and an individual ID tag number. And the reason they do that is when they are medicated, the ID number, their individual ID number is written down. So when those cattle are sold, they make sure that the withdrawal period is adhered to. So what she's talking about is more important than most people can imagine.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. Thank you, Judd. Becky, anything to add with regard to that?
Specifically on the withdrawal or the VCPR?
On the VCPR in general.
Oh, yeah. Well, just kind of, I still get a little bit of pushback, like, I haven't needed a vet in 10 years. Why do I have to have you out? You just want to make money off of me. So, and honestly, it's not a money grab. I do not have time to see every single pink eye case that everybody comes in. So, it's not that sort of thing. But I want to, like I said, we want to be your partner and get the best product possible out of your herd and keep that residue free, like we were talking about. And also, my license is on the line too. So if that goes back to your rancher and I prescribe that medication, then I'm in trouble too. So it's good for all of us. And one thing with that, like I said, I put protocols in place for the basic stuff that you'll come across during the year. So if something pops up and you need more medication for something we've already talked about, I can go ahead and prescribe that for you. If you have a whole new problem come up that you have not dealt with, then we actually need to have a visit again to reestablish a new protocol for that. And telemedicine, it's kind of getting in that gray area. Is that an okay way to follow up and that sort of thing? I think that probably will be in the future a way to re-up, not our yearly visit, but in between.
All right, Judd's got one more question. Judd.
In my mind is, if one of your clients uses a medication and they do not use the withdrawal period, do not keep them in home until the withdrawal period is over with, and they take them to the sale and somebody buys them and they get tested, is your license on the line?
Technically, yes. Even though I wasn't the one to give the drug, but you're probably secure if I had a protocol in place, a written protocol that said this is the withdrawal time, this is the drug to be used. If that was not followed, then that's not really on me. That's on the producer. But you have to have that relationship. And frankly, if I go out and I don't trust the person, I may not be giving them antibiotics to use. So, that's part of that relationship formed. It's a trust issue both ways.
Well, and Becky, that's a really good transition, I think. This is something that my vet lectures me on a lot. But how do you get ready for a vet visit? Do you just have the cows out in a quarter section pasture and say, there they are? Or are there some things that folks need to do to get ready for your visit? What are those things?
Yeah, definitely. I've kind of learned that with new cattle clients, especially hobby farmers, we need to have a little bit of a phone interview first and just find out what facilities are. But I kind of had some goals for my cattle visits, and that is that safety for both the people handling them, myself, and the cattle. We want it to be as low stress on the cattle and the people as possible, and also to be efficient. Most of my herd work is all charged by the hour. So that's where efficiency kind of comes in. And things that are going to help with that are proper facilities for handling the type and number of cattle that you have. There's lots of different ways that you can do it. It doesn't have to be a big, fancy, really expensive setup. I've seen some homemade stuff that works fine. It just needs to work for you and be safe. And one little note that I have there, during the summer, do a wasp check before I come out. This summer, I have not been stung, but every single one of my helpers has. So always going through and checking the chutes for wasps is a good thing. Another thing that can help us be more efficient is going to be having adequate help. And this is especially for the larger herds. I don't mind, helping push cattle through or occasionally, or head catching. If I'm preg checking, it's hard to head catch with one arm and stuff. And, we do that sometimes. But having a couple extra people to help push and keep it going will definitely make everything more efficient. Also, having your cattle caught is important and sorted kind of prior to me getting there. So if we're doing some preg checks, some sick checks, and some brucellosis, not mixing up, brucellosis and I'm doing a preg check and then I have to change sleeves and do brucellosis and back and forth. That's just not very efficient. You're going to end up paying more for that. And the other thing that's really helpful and is just good practice is to keep good records. Write down when and who you vaccinated, who you dewormed, any treatments you've done. As far as preg checks, it's also helpful if you AI'd and then you turned your herd bull in right away, or you held them out a month, or what your breeding dates were. It just helps me be more accurate, and it's good to keep those records.
And that record keeping for those of you who may be new to this is certainly something that your farm advisor can help you put together too. Just an observation, Becky. I've been to Judd's place when they're working cattle, been a few other places, and I think the places that are efficient always have their best stock handler in the back, making sure that the vet's never waiting for cattle.
Yeah,
and that's a really important point.
It's true. I mean, I've brucellosis 60 heifers in 30 minutes before, and then I've preg checked 20 cows in 2 hours before. So it depends on your help.
Absolutely. So the next thing I want to dig into a little deeper is kind of developing a herd health program. What goes into working with your vet to come up with a herd health program and a vaccination program?
So if you're brand new to starting out, it can be as simple as, okay, well, we need to figure out when your calving season is going to be, because a lot of your vaccination program is going to be based around your breeding and calving season. So are you going to do fall or spring? How long are you going to turn your bulls in? So you have a kind of a defined calving schedule. And then there's kind of two basic vaccinations, if you will. Every cow should have an 8-way Clostridial vaccine. And then we have our viral vaccine that's going to have IBR, BVD, PI3, BRSV, and certainly for our cows and heifers, pre-breeding would be Vibrio or Lepto for the abortifacients. So there's lots of different brands. We don't need to talk about that here. That's something you can talk to your vet about, what works best for you. And modified live versus killed, that's again something that's really going to depend on your herd management. If you have a wide calving season, you don't know when the last cow was vaccinated, a modified live is not for you. It's safer to go killed. So some of that is going to just depend on how organized, I guess, your herd is.
Do you have any preference for route of administration when you have an option in vaccines, as injectable or other routes?
So most of them are going to be injectable. I'm kind of a fan of the intranasal viral vaccines for certain age groups. I like, especially spring calves on irrigated pasture going into summer. I find those can have a lot of pneumonia issues, and if we hit them with the intranasal vaccines, that can really help. Also pre-stressful, like pre-weaning or something, the intranasal can just give you a little extra boost as well in preventing some pneumonia problems. And other optional things, it depends on your herd problems. There's obviously bacterial pneumonia vaccine that you can add in. There's pink eye vaccines. They can be helpful in the herds that are, more poorly managed. I think they do help. They're certainly not something that you cannot do all the things with ectoparasites that Dr. Meyer talked about earlier, but they can also be helpful.
One of the things that I worked on a little bit when I was at the Sierra Field Station, it's kind of an exciting turn of events, and that is the fact that we've now got a foothill abortion vaccine. Could you maybe describe what that disease is a little bit, and then talk about what the vaccine can do for us?
Sure, and it's kind of interesting in most of my herds, except for the ones that ship cows out of our area. I really rarely ever see this, but it is certainly something that is a big problem in a lot of areas in California, and it is caused by the tick, and causes fetal loss. Often it's usually late term abortions or weak calves, but they're infected, 4 or 5 plus months earlier. So one way that, ranchers for many, many years have kind of tried to deal with this is grazing your heifers before you breed them in your pastures, are tick infected. And so they will get an immunity to it with that if it's done pre-breeding. But obviously that's not practical for everybody. So they've been working on this vaccine for a long time, and the Hygiea Biological Labs in Woodland has come out with that, and it is labeled for open animals at least 6 months of age, and then you give it at least 60 days prior to breeding. I did not find in their information if you do have to do it yearly. I thought I read something that said you might have a duration of immunity of 3 years. So that would be something I would need to look into, or you could look into with your vet if that's an issue for you.
So one of the things that came up in the year that I was kind of peripherally helping with that study was that warmer winters, we seemed to have no decline in tick activity. We actually had heifers exposed in January and February during the drought. Yeah, and that became an issue for some folks too.
Yeah. So I think if this is an issue where you're grazing cattle, this could be really handy for you.
Absolutely. We've got a question in the chat box. Should I be worried about spring calves getting pneumonia on the coast where it can be foggy quite a bit?
We typically do see more respiratory illness when we have the cool versus the warm. It just seems across livestock species that is. So I definitely would be watching them closer during that time frame for sure.
Have you seen any impact from the smoky weather we've had late summer here? Have you seen any increase in respiratory issues?
In my group, not a ton, not as much as I would think, but I think it depends on the stress level of the animals at where you have, are you weaning calves during this time? Some of those things, it's definitely, some of there's a couple that have had more calf pneumonias, but I would have expected more across the board than actually I've seen.
Okay. Maybe
they're not calling me, but.
I have a question for you, and I would encourage folks to keep putting questions in the chat box, but I have this conversation with my vet on occasion too. What can a rancher do to get fired by his vet or her vet? What's something that you would say, you need to find somebody else to come out here?
Yeah, for me personally, you have to do quite a bit to get fired. I've only fired 2 people, I think, in the past 16 years. So I have a personality. I can work with a lot of different people, and just, try to work with that. But I think if you're mean, then we're not going to work together. I mean, I don't need to go out and have somebody yell at me, right? So, and that just means we're not going to work together. Also, I've had one of the people that was fired would, if they didn't like the outcome, they would come back and want their money back. And that just, after those sorts of things, when we get to the point that we don't have a good working relationship, that I don't think you trust me and I certainly don't trust you, there's other vets out there that you might work better with. And so, but I would say basically verbal abuse, and if you cancel on me 5 times in a row, then you're not getting priority. That's for sure. So, but other than that, I really do try to work with people and not be too picky and stuff. So.
We have another question in the chat box. At what age do you recommend vaccinating your calves?
So I think somewhere between that 3 to 6 month range. Before then, we still have some colostral immunity, and we're not going to probably get the immune response that we want. Some of that is also going to depend on when you're weaning these calves and what you're doing right afterwards. If they're going to the sale the week after you wean, you want to make sure you have both their boosters in before they go, so that they're as protected as possible.
Okay. Okay. Well, great. Anybody else have any additional questions that they want to add for either Dr. Childers or Dr. Meyer? Well, you thought you were going to get off easy, but I have one more quiz for you, one more poll for you. So you can still put questions in the chat box, but let's see. We did have one more question on Gabby's poll, and it looks like we're pretty evenly split between the products there, Gabby. So let's go to our next poll. And this is our post-webinar poll. So first question there is, based on what you learned during this webinar about external parasites, are you confident you're already doing the right things? Or are you going to change? Or are you going to contact your vet? Pick the one that best applies to you. And just go right on down the line there. And when you get to question 3, if you already own livestock, we better have 100% yeses in there. All right. Everybody see it okay? All right, we've got 5 voters. Woohoo! All right, I'll give you 5 more seconds. We'll go to minute 50 in the poll here if anybody hasn't voted that wants to vote. All right, so first question about external parasites. Some folks are confident that what they're doing is sufficient, but a number of you are going to talk to your vet about that, which is great. Internal parasites, pretty much similar results. And we've got one respondent that does not currently have a vet-client-patient relationship. So that will be, I would assume that that's the one person that said they're going to do that next. And then folks thinking about improving facilities and working with their vet on their parasite control program. So outstanding. Let's see, we got another question in the chat box. What works best on horn or face flies at this time of year?
Well, I don't know if it's different this time of the year than any other time of the year. I don't know. Do we need? I'd like to have a little more clarification. Like in what is different now, or why? What's?
Judd, I'll ask you to expand on that question.
What?
Was that your question about what works best on horn or face flies
Yes.
this time of year?
Every year we go through this face fly and this horn fly thing. And you start out in the beginning of the year using whatever, Brute or Exit Gold or whatever's on the market. You put the material on their back, it lasts for 6 weeks. Every year, 6 weeks, maybe 7. Then you come back and you redo it again. It lasts 4 weeks. You come back in about 4 or 5 weeks and it lasts 3 weeks. And this time of year, nothing works. That's the reason why I asked the question. I don't know why that happens, but it does. You can put stuff on.
Probably have the toughest survivors, you know, those are the toughest ones that are,
That's right.
they didn't get killed by any of this stuff.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good question. So, I mean, well, if you think that you still have high enough numbers that it's a problem, try something else. You know, that's the thing. If you just, you know, if you do the same thing over and over, then yeah, of course, it's not going to work anymore at some point. So,
what is that?
Well, you go to that page, or you go to that page, you look for horn flies or phase flies, you find something that's in a different class. You're shaking your head, you say it's not gonna.
We've tried everything on the market, we've tried it.
Well,
now what's interesting, Bill Dale tells me down in Louisiana, it was so bad that the cattle were black and they were dying. Did you hear that?
I heard that after the hurricanes, when it was super wet, when there was a lot of rain, cattle got killed by mosquitoes because they lost too much blood. Yeah, it's terrible.
I was shocked.
I recommend you go, and I know this is a little bit of a cop-out, but I would encourage you to talk to Dr. Gary, because that's all he does, or that's his thing. So talk to him, see if he has anything for you. So if you go to that page, it's in the chat box, veterinary entomology webpage. You will find his contact in there.
And that's something I can help facilitate too.
Okay, great.
And help make those contacts.
Yes.
Any other questions for either one of our speakers?
Good job, guys.
Well, Dr. Meyer and Dr. Childers, thank you very, very much for giving up your evening tonight and joining us. It was really, really informative for me, and I think everybody else got a lot out of it as well. And I'm going to ask Judd to have the last word because he usually does anyway.
Did you realize that Jackie Davis was part of the foothill abortion study way back? You can ask him about it. Probably most of you don't know that because he's an old guy.
I think Jackie Davis has been part of just about everything that's happened in the cattle business in this part of the world for half a century or more.
There you go, Jackie.
Thank you. All right, so I will post this information on my YouTube channel. We do have more webinars next week, so check that out as well. I will be sending an evaluation survey out to everybody that was on this tonight. Just if you can, spend 5 minutes and give us some feedback as to what you learned, and then also what other topics you'd be interested in learning more about. And with that, we'll see you next week. Gabby and Becky, thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you. It was fun.
Have a good night, everybody.
Good night.
Bye.